You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. I learned more new things this week as I poked around on Langchain4j and some video recording. I found the latter is really challenging to find a quiet block of time when family is home in the summer and you have a squeaky dryer. And even though I present all the time, something about recording is a little less comfortable than live for me. I guess that means I need to do it a bunch until it becomes easy. In this episode, I'll give updates on my exploration into Langchain4j, as well as chat about another article I found on MCP and security and how a new authorization spec is impacting enterprise developers. It's always interesting that technology is built for developers to use, but sometimes misses ease of use features that actually make it easy for developers to use. The end result high might be worth it, but getting there ends up a series of varying emotional states. Leaves you questioning whether the benefits are truly worth the hassle. Anyway, the first topic up for today is Langchain4j. I built a sample project using Quarkus, Langchain4j, and Neo4j. I will have the GitHub repository linked in the show notes. And again, I also have a Spring AI counterpart that you can compare just to see how the two technologies frameworks stack up against one another. My initial thoughts just working on Langchain4j this week is that it felt similar to my somewhat limited experience with Langchain. I can't exactly put my finger on specifically what the similarity was there, but each piece of the final LLM call, things like the configuration, the model, etc., was all in a single chained block. While you can do this in Spring AI, I don't feel like it's the default mentality, or maybe it's because I'm more familiar with the Spring framework and traditional application development through the Spring ecosystem, where this feels more similar to the Langchain ecosystem, I guess. Langchain4j does abstract things away, though, just like Spring AI does, but there wasn't as much room to disentangle specific pieces if you needed to customize a specific bit. For instance, the process for just general GraphRAG is typically to call a vector similarity search, then take those results and pass them into a retrieval query for a graph database. In Spring AI, you can tease out the vector search and then manually pass the results of the vector search to a query that you run against the database. But Spring still abstracts the model, the vector store, and question embedding bits into beans that just get auto-configured that you can still use. You just dismantle the vector search and the LLM call piece and customize those bits. However, in Langchain4j, I could not find a way to do that. In order to avoid sending the call, which does everything, including the question embedding, the vector search, the prompt stuffing, and the final LLM call all together, I have to write all the boilerplate to just customize one piece of that. So I have to write the code to create the embedding model, the chat model, the vector store beans, plus run each of those steps manually using the boilerplate I've defined. There was no way I could see to use the beans that were already defined, auto-injected, and just customize the individual pieces that I needed. Maybe I'm missing something, but this approach felt pretty clunky. I included in the application a plain LLM call, a vector RAG call, and a GraphRAG call, and there ended up being a lot of extra clutter code that was needed for the GraphRAG piece that wasn't necessary for the other pieces. I ended up cluttering up the one resource class with lots of extraneous bits, some for the vector call, some for the graph call, some for the LLM call, and not all of it was relevant to all the pieces. I think if I were to do this in a production style application or something that was much more critical, I would separate those out. I'd split into separate files for a vanilla vector call and then a separate file for a GraphRAG call. Langchain4j is also available for use in Spring and a few other frameworks as well. This just didn't seem like a natural fit to me. I would automatically be drawn toward the tools within that own specific ecosystem. That's why I combined Quarkus and Langchain4j this round. Langchain4j Quarkus, though, is pretty thinly documented. It relies on the Quarkus side, which I have found to be pretty sparse on the documentation, which is not overly unusual for documentation in general anyway. I'll continue to play with it, and I'm sure improvements are coming quickly as always. The article for today I have talked a little bit about in previous episodes, that MCP the benefits and then some of the gaps that it still has. One of those being security specifically. And I found an article on a new authorization spec, and the article is titled "The MCP Authorization Spec is a Mess for Enterprise." The author talks about how security has started to be implemented in MCP. So one of the original gaps was that there really was no provision for security practices inside MCP. Now that is starting to be developed and those gaps filled. However, what's there so far is not ideally designed for enterprises and their best practices. I really enjoyed how this article steps through a process or how a particular piece of the architecture works, and then discusses specific organizational practices that show you why it's problematic. It made it really easy to see, not just from the playground developer's perspective, but also from the enterprise developer's mindset, and understand why those with business decision powers might be a bit hesitant to adopt the things as they are. The new spec puts the security burden on each MCP server to create and manage tokens. And the author talks about how that impacts the way enterprises typically architect authorization, as well as creates a lot of overhead that defies organizational practices as they stand today. Mostly, the article sums up that the current spec isn't designed for enterprise use, but as with most things, it's still in active development and will hopefully see improvements in the near future. The thing that I really liked about this author's take on it is he wasn't saying, again, that this technology isn't valuable. It just, right now, the things that they're trying to fill the gaps with don't necessarily take big companies or enterprise developers into account. So they end up having to do a lot of workarounds or go outside of business practice. And if you think about the additional overhead that's going to add, that's going to be a hesitation point for a lot of enterprises and businesses in general. And again, that may change. It'll adapt and improve as people start either complaining or submitting requests or features or PRs to fix those things, but that's going to take some time. Technology continues to evolve quickly, so the same frustrations and gaps that exist today may not tomorrow. As I learn, I'll continue to pass along any tidbits that I pick up, and I'm always interested in learning from others to fill in on the things that I miss. Thanks for listening, and happy coding.